Alright, so now we're going to be talking about wiring the switches into the controllers for jump and drop shots. Very similar to what scuf gaming controllers do if you want to do these yourself. So I think the best way to start talking about that is first just understanding how a switch works, and then we can relate that back into how it works on a controller. So if you're never messed with this stuff before, let's pretend that you had a battery and it has a positive and a negative side and little terminals coming off the top. Let's say you have a light bulb that also has something that needs a positive and a negative, and you have light bulbs there, but it's currently off because it's not hooked up to this battery. So you can just straight up connect the negative to the negative, no big deal there. And if you were to run a wire directly from here to here, this would just light up. But when you put a switch in place, this connection is now not made, so there's no light. But whenever you press the switch, you can imagine this coming down and completing that circuit, and suddenly you have light. And on a controller, it's really no different. You just have normally there's the circuit board if we're looking at it from the side, and then there's these two little pads, and then whenever you press down a button, let's just say this is like your A button, there's a little rubber dome that's here, and the rubber dome has a strip of carbon on it, and whenever you close that, the carbon closes these two gaps and fires the switch, so that when you press this down, the controller thinks that you've pressed the A or circle or X button, whatever console you have. So basically what we can do is, and what all the other companies out there do, is you can find points in the circuit board on this switch to say, let's say this is positive and negative. It's just completing a circuit though. This can still work how it normally does, but if you hook a wire up here and here and hook it up into a switch or a button of some sort, when this button is pressed, it does the same thing as this button being pressed, closing this gap. So you're just bridging that gap, essentially, where this is like a positive and this is a ground. So that's the general theory about how these switches work. And really the next thing you need to know is like how to wire them. And before we took that daughter board off of the Xbox controller, and it looks a lot like this, so we'll draw that on there. But of particular note are these clusters of connectors here and here, and if I can get it in focus, these two little silver dots right underneath this pad here. So I'll draw this on the board there, set the camera back up, and then we'll talk about that. So this is a very crude drawing of the Xbox One circuit board, but it's important to know this for whenever you're doing the soldering, you understand how it works. This little cluster that's on the right hand side is kind of where the two boards meet up. You've got the analog stick there, so this is as if you were holding it like this, obviously blown up and not to scale. You've got this cluster here, and this is basically a connector that's surface mounted onto the circuit board. And then you've got this button here, which is actually your B button, and these two little test points underneath it. So if you were to hook a wire up to this one, that is actually your B button to this test point. Now because it's on that board specifically, and the button for pressing it is not actually on the board where the LED sits, that I showed you in the previous video, these two connectors actually join those two boards together, kind of like if you were plugging in a USB cable or something like that, or a Molex connector if you're familiar with computers. This board here has a number of switch spots on it that relate to other buttons. And you can do 99% of what you need to do off of this connector. So most people only care about A and B, So if you're worried about A, it's on the bottom, and it's the very middle pin. And that's A. If you were doing like a 4-button setup, you've got this one here, which is Y. And then directly vertical from that one here is is X. If you wanted to recreate some of the other buttons, there's on this circuit board over here, there's the same 7-pin layout on the top and the bottom. And if you wanted to reconnect to those, you have right here is the up, and right here is left, this pin right here. And you have, it's this pin right here. And then the same corresponding side, the 2 pins you've got right and down. I don't really use those too often, but I just wanted to show you that the buttons are kind of mapped all over the place. So now with that in mind, there's also another point up here. You'll see it kind of near the edge, like where the bumper would be. It's marked TP9. That's test point 9. That's particularly useful if you're looking to light LEDs, because that's a 3.3 volt power source that only turns on when the controller's turned on or plugged into USB. So now I'll just wipe all this off, and we'll get to actually soldering some buttons in. Since this is the most kind of critical step, I'm just being a little more thorough here, and the video will be longer than the other ones. So reset the camera and we'll get to soldering. Alright, here's that circuit board we were just looking at the drawing of. If you can see it right here is this test point. It's very small, but it's there. And this is that connector I was telling you about where there's the 7 pins. And like I said, the one we care about for this controller is the very most middle one right here, which is the A button, and then this is obviously B. So we're going to do jump and drop shot buttons. So for this part of the mod, you'll obviously need the trusty tweezers. You're going to need a soldering iron and solder. This is probably the toughest part, so you just want to make sure you take some care there. You're going to need a length of wire for each button. I like to try to color coordinate the wire to the color of button that it goes with. So I'll have a little bit of green wire for the A button, and a little bit of red wire for the other one, the B button. And then I'll also do a little bit of black wire for the ground, which is pretty standard colors for some of this stuff. So like I said, the tools you'll need is the tweezers, the soldering iron. You'll need a hot glue gun. That also helps greatly in this part. And that should be about it. Obviously some snips to cut the wires if you don't already have wires cut the length or something. You only need, I would just cut about like 10 inches per, because you can always trim it down later. Mine will be a little bit shorter than that just because I've done this I think 60 or 70 times now. So it's just something I'm used to. So off camera, I've already gone ahead and cut my lengths of wire in all the different colors, and I'm going to get started here. So like I said before, remember it's important to tin your iron, and let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is drop a little extra solder on that one test point for the B button, simply because it'll make it easier. It'll make it easier to attach wires to it. I'll try to do this as best as I can while keeping the camera out of view. And yeah, so I'm just adding some solder to my iron and getting it set up appropriately. Alright, so I just added a little bit more there. You're probably not going to be able to see it on camera, but you know, it is what it is. So I'm going to do the same thing here for the connection on the bottom. I'm going to try to add another light here though, because it's kind of hard to see what's going on. So from the bottom at least. Yeah, that's probably better. All right. So again, I've got my soldering iron, and I've got this board, which I'm actually going to adjust here on this stand, which is called a helping hands. It's just going to make it easier for me to work on it. All right, keeping this in view of the camera. Okay, so now if you can see that there's just a little extra tiny blob of solder on there. It's still nice, bright and shiny, which tells me I have my soldering iron at a good temperature, and I'm using you know, solder that's still a good quality. So now we'll zoom back out for a moment so I can show you the edge of this red wire here. I'm just going to, if you don't have a wire stripper, you can just pinch it between your fingernails and strip the very edge of it, which is going to be difficult, but you can kind of tell, difficult to see. And then I like to strip that back down to about a little less than 1/8 of an inch, and do the same thing on the green wire while you're at it. So just strip the end of it, and this is also why I cut it long, so I don't have to be too careful. Take my clippers and cut it short. You could use scissors for these. It's super short, so it really doesn't even matter. Okay, so now you'll need the tweezers. And I will try to make this so that the camera can be in a good spot here, but I can still get to what I need to do this. Okay, so what we're looking for is right here, this shiny little dot. I'm going to go ahead and solder wire onto it. And here we go. So, like I said, this is the hardest part of the whole modding experience, really. Once you have this, it's all pretty easy. It helps if the wire is curving down a little bit so that it can hit the circuit board without the tweezers jaws getting in the way. Okay. Alright, I didn't like how that sat, so sometimes it's helpful to actually come in from the side like this so that you don't get an accidental short on the test point that's below it, and this is fine like this. You want to be careful with this because it's just barely tacked on. It's enough that it'll stay, but we're going to drop a little dot of hot glue somewhere along this wire here to help keep that locked in place so that it doesn't come undone. So now we'll do the same thing for the grain. And my heater just kicked on, so if you're wondering what the extra noise is, that's what it is. It's like -20 where I'm at right now, so it's pretty cold outside. But that doesn't stop us. We're just going to keep on modding. Alright, here we go. Same thing here. Curve it down a little bit so that you can get in there. And top down is probably a good way to get this. There we go, nice good connection. Alright, the biggest trouble that people have with this part is accidentally getting too much solder on there and bridging 2 of those pins, and it's a real risk with that. The way that you deal with that, if it happens, is you get this stuff called solder wick, It just kind of looks like a braid of wire, solder wick, and you would just set it on top of your connections, put your soldering iron on top of that, and it'll suck the solder through it. It'll just draw it up by heat, and you get, you know, it's good there. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug in the hot glue gun, because we'll need it in a moment. But for this, just to recap, we soldered the A, which is the very middle pin, and we soldered to this test point up here, B, the top one. It's right above the pad that's marked D14, which this is this pad, D14. Yeah, so all right, so we've got the back of the board here now. Basically just flipped everything over. These are the wires we soldered in the previous step. Now I've got a black wire here. There we go. And then I'm just going to solder to one of these points here. So basically you've got all these ground locations back here. There's 4 on the chat adapter part. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 easy ones to solder to. Here you've cut the grounds for the rumbles that you could solder to. There's grounds up here for the bumpers that you could solder to. They're all over the place. I'm sorry, not the bumpers, but this switch up here that you can solder to. There's grounds everywhere. It's what they call a common ground system. So basically I'm just going to tie it into this one. One area you want to avoid when you're laying these wires down, though, and it's mostly for whenever you're like hot gluing them in place, is I'm going to put a piece of tape over it just to kind of mark off where it is, but you kind of want to avoid this area right here. And the reason for that is on the shell that this would sit in this way, and there's these two supports here, right here and right here. And if you lay any wires on top of there, the board will sit slightly off center, and it'll go back together. But then you'll notice that right here is the chat port, and the chat adapter will be slightly off, and you won't be able to get your chat adapter on. So I just like to avoid putting things there. So for me, that means I'm just going to connect here, and I'm going to bring these wires up, probably up here, whenever I hot glue them all together, and then they'll go where they need to go. But yeah, so for soldering, I use the same technique we've been using, where I just have the wire and have it bent just a little bit, and I've got this solder point here, and alright, well, it's in there, but I want it a little bit better than that looks like at the moment, so. Ow, I don't have enough solder in mine. So this is why having a tinned tip is really important rather than going in dry. So you just do this, and then the solder will bend to your will much better. That's good. Okay. So now I've got all that. So the next step we want to do is we're going to hot glue these in place. So for that, we'll just flip the board back over, and we want to tack these down so that they're just not in the way. So I've just got a regular hot glue gun here. I like to just squirt a little bit out first, make sure it's flowing nice, and clean the tip off. And the easiest way to do this, just load up another glue stick and we'll zoom out. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is in this little corner here. You want to kind of aim the wires down towards that, but this red one, you want to give it enough room so that it's not going to interfere with this connector when it sits in. So once this is in place, I said I like to just curve this up and then over. So that looks good right there. I'm just going to drop a dot of hot glue on there, and then wait like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 seconds, something like that. Wet the end of my finger with a sponge or, you know, whatever you have around, and then push down on it, and it makes it nice and slim so that it's not going to cause any issues in the case. Then when you bring that wire back over towards this red one and into that corner, you can glue both of those ones down together on the flat part of the circuit board. The same kind of tactic where you just drag a little bit of hot glue over, wait a few seconds, moisten your finger, you can push down on it so it doesn't burn your finger. Now the wires are kind of set in that hot glue. And then on the other side, like I said, you just want to avoid that area where I have that green tape. So it's easy enough to just keep these here. Now one of these wires, this red one, you don't actually have to glue down just yet because it's going to go this way in the controller. So it's mostly for these two. So I like to bring this one up here, and then that way it lets me anchor this black one down as well at the same time. So again, just a little drop of hot glue. You don't got to be too precise with it. Wet your finger, set them in, and then you can braid these if you want, or just lightly rotate them together to keep things nice and clean. And you're just aiming for the corner over here, and I just like to hit it again kind of above this little barcode just to try to keep them in place. There you go, that one was a little hotter than I was expecting, but that's fine. Okay, so that covers that. If you want to be a little on the safer side, you can also drop a dot right there, unplug your hot glue gun, turn off your soldering iron, and you know, that's that basically for the board. You've gotten your B button taken care of and your A button taken care of, and you'll be able to do jump and drop shots with those once we get to the next step of modding the controllers, which we're going to work on taking this apart, getting to the rubber dome switches under there if you wanted to change your buttons out, and if you wanted to change your LED, we'll go over that. I'll show you what you would do if you're going to change like your bumpers or your triggers. A little bit more work, but you guys can handle it. And the LED is kind of the tougher, one of the tougher parts. Not everybody's going to need or want to change that though. So, but this will also let you know how to get into here and change like your D-pad and your face buttons, your guide button if you want, or your start and your menu, or whatever they're called on the Xbox One. And we'll cover those. So that about does it.